Good morning. Wake up, wake up. That's right. Good morning, freedom fighters. Welcome to Dark Side of Education. I'm your host, Rashad Turner. I thank y'all for tuning in. Much love. As usual, I hope you got your coffee. Hope you got your tea, whatever you need to get it going. Shout out again to Louis Blaze on the intro, freedom fighter. My guy, Louis Blaze, in for holding it down. Appreciate you, Louis Blaze. Got a lot to talk about today, y'all. It's another Sunday. And before I get to talking, right, I'm going to tell y'all, I ordered up some takeout last night. I ain't going to do my whole Google review here, but wasn't the best. So I'm going to try to get through this show today. If you see me run off, I'll be right back. Just kidding. But on today's show, just like other shows, y'all, we're going to cover many different issues, concerns, solutions related to education here in Minnesota. I know we have viewers from around the country, so some of the things that we talk about are probably applicable. And I think today, when we dive into this money, right, shmoney, I think you'll find some things quite interesting, right? So money is one of the topics today. Also going to talk about what time it is as far as what us parents want to do, right? How us parents might want to respond to the way the school systems seem to be ignoring us, right? Lots of families talking about, how basically schools have turned their backs on them, right? And we have educational chaos here in Minnesota, just like we do all around the country. But in some places, COVID has changed what's going on. Here in Minnesota, it's really illuminated some of the ills and the dark side of our education system. So throughout the show, I'll try to get to comments, get to questions. Be sure to drop them in the comments. Good morning, Jesse. Good morning. Now, when it comes to education in Minnesota, you may have seen in reports in local magazines or online outlets, such as Education Week, where there was a report that ranked Minnesota 7th nationally. And this is back in 2019 for our K-12 achievement. You might have also seen the U.S. News and World Report that ranked Minnesota 12th, and they were looking at the whole system, pre-K through 12. Now, when I looked at those reports, first thing I did was laughed, right? It was sort of a ha, ha, ha. 7th nationally, 12th. Well, for who though? Right? And in Minnesota, there's a big information gap. And then you got to tie that information gap with what we call Minnesota Nice, right? And Minnesota Nice leads us to, every once in a while we'll do these polls or someone will do a poll. And when you look at some of these polls, 60 to 80%, right? That's the range of Minnesotans who were polled. When asked how good they think our schools are, they give them an A or a B, right? And it didn't matter if they were looking at Minnesota as a whole or if they were looking at their local communities, right? Now, I laughed at the reports, but I won't laugh at the folks who did the poll, right? Because I don't think the respondents are out of their minds. We have to keep in mind that schools do everything they can to make people think, to make us think that they're doing a great job for our children, right? Whether it's in the newsletters, the emails we get, Carol Levin might even run a story talking about how good a school is. But then when we look at the data, we know that's not true, right? And then you have the teachers unions And they're running for, there's some awards we're giving out this year. And right now, they're running in first place for White Supremacist of the Year here in Minnesota, right? So you have these teachers unions and their elected officials, right? The bought and paid for elected officials who are telling us that we don't spend enough money on education, right? Which leads to this confusion, right? They muddied the waters, which I would say is very intentional, because when you also take a look at some of the polls and they ask the question of, well, how much do we all think that we're spending on education here in Minnesota? Lots of folks respond and they say, oh, $2,000, $3,000 per student, right? And I'm gonna ask y'all, and answer in the comments if you want to, but what do you all think we spend on average per student here in Minnesota? Do you know? You have a guess? Put it in comments, right? Most people think, and I sort of, implied that this was incorrect, but most people think that we're spending $2,000 to $3,000 per year, per student every year. What do we spend? Right? Now, according to the most recent U.S. Census Bureau data, and this changes, right? This is back from a couple of years ago. But the average, right? Minnesota spends on average just about $13,000 per student each year, right? So a lot of us may think it's $2,000 or $3,000, but it's right about $13,000, right? You might also see reports that show it closer to $14,000 or $15,000, right? So thank you for taking a guess there, Jesse, and you're close, right? You're close. This here from the Census Bureau says about 13,000. I'll show you some numbers later that show it at about 14,000, right? So right in there. And I want us to pause and think for a second that Florida, on the other hand, spends right about $9,300 per pupil, right? We're at about 13,000, 14,000. Florida's at about 9,300. Texas, okay, because, in Minnesota, we think that, we're the best thing since sliced bread. We got 10,000 lakes, just as many fakes, but we think we're the best, right? Texas, a state that has similar student demographics, not exactly the same, but very similar, spends about $9,600 a year per pupil, right? 9,600 to our 13,000, 14,000. And I won't leave out the dirty South, right? The deep South. My homies in Mississippi. And we know Mississippi is way more diverse than Minnesota, right? Way more Black people down in Mississippi, right? Way more people of color. And in Mississippi, they spend about $9,000 per student, right? Now, I highlighted those three. I'll come back to them later, okay? It's obviously a point I'm making there, but we'll get to it. Now, that's per pupil funding, right? Let's look at some other numbers when it comes to education here in Minnesota, right? Education funding in Minnesota is 41%, right? Right around 41% of our state's budget. I read something earlier this week. It said we spend more money on education than we do on public safety, transportation, and health and human services put together. 41%. All right. Now, in addition to that per pupil, schools across the state also receive about $600 million a year to help out with what's called the basic skills funding, right? This is supposed to go directly to students who aren't currently meeting the academic standards. It's called basic skills funding. And they'll tell you, if you look it up, it's meant to close the achievement gap. I mean, that's something that they name right in their write-ups. This basic skills funding is meant to close the achievement gap. Schools also get federal Title I funds, right? They have a high percentage of students. I think the mark is 40%, but 40% or more students in a school building who qualify for free or reduced lunch, right? That's when a school gets Title I funding. All of that damn money, right? And you're looking at it there, the per pupil, what we spend out of our state budget, the additional dollars that go into our schools, right? All of this damn money, and for what though? Right? For what? Now, let me show you something real quick. I want to pull this up, and this is specifically about the per pupil funding, right? Minnesota per pupil spending. Now, if you look at this, right, take a second and look at it. It breaks down, and Jesse, this is where I was saying that other number comes in, right? And this is from the U.S. Department of Education. But it breaks down what they're saying is $14,000 per student. Shows us where it goes. A lot of it to instruction, administration, support, and you see the other things there. Now that's the breakdown, right? Now try to put this in the comments so you can pull this up for yourself. But it's from the U.S. Department of Education. Now, while I have this up, I want us to think about something for a second. Say it's 14,000, and we see this is where the money goes, right? And before we get into that, you know, for what though, right? All of this money for what though? Think about this. We've been hearing more and more lately about how the money, our education dollars per pupil spending should follow our children. And I agree, right? And I don't think that's going to happen overnight. But when you look at this pie here, think about all of the things that we could do as parents to make sure our students are getting a quality education with this money here, right? And this doesn't include the additional dollars for this or the additional dollars for that, right? Special ed costs are included. But think about what we could do with this as parents, as we're thinking about the current present situation with our education system, right? All of that money. I'll tell you. So we get all of this money in our schools, and what are the results? Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? We always hear about how money is going to change education. We've been hearing this for years now. Only thing that has changed, and it's not been for the good, but the only thing that's changed is that our achievement gap continues to grow wider and wider every year, right? And these are the results we get with all of that money, right? 2019, MCA math test results, 44%, a little bit over 44% of students, third graders through eighth graders in grade 11, not performing at grade level. 44.6% not performing at grade level. In reading, 40% of students, 3 through 8 in grade 10, not performing at grade level, right? It's even more criminal when broken down by ethnicity, okay? Now check this out. 44% of Asian students, nearly 68% of Hispanic students, 72% of American Indian, Alaska Native students, and 72% of Black students are not proficient in math. Okay? Think about that. Not proficient in math. 44% of Asians, 68% of Hispanic students, 72% of our Native babies and our Black babies. Children, not proficient in math. Okay? Now let that sink in, right? Because the gap here in Minnesota, and it might be like this where you're at as well, but it continues to grow. So you've seen the money. We're starting to dig into these results here in Minnesota, right? But the achievement gap continues to grow, right? And I get some pushback sometimes. Why are you always focused on the students of color, right? Well, someone has to. Someone has to. You look at these numbers and it's clear not enough of the people who are in positions of power are thinking about our children, Black, brown, indigenous children, right? But I can dig into this data a little bit more and let you know, okay, it's not just about ethnicity. No, not at all, right? Low-income white students, right? Low-income white students are way behind higher-income white students, just for the folks who don't want me to always focus on the children of color, right? This is about quality education, folks. I'm about quality education, okay? So if it's students of color, if it's low-income white students, the message, the answer is still the same. Our children need quality education, and we're not getting it, okay? But let's go back to Texas, y'all. Let's go back to Texas, right? Who spends less per pupil, remember, right? Just for a minute, let's go back to Texas. Black, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander students outperformed those same student groups here in Minnesota, and Texas spends less per pupil, right? Less money, better results, right? Mississippi, who, remember, y'all, they spend about $9,000 per student, right? Their student body, and I started to get into this earlier, their student body is made up of nearly 50% Black students. Nearly 50% Black students in Mississippi, compared to Minnesota nice, right? Our great old Minnesota, not compared to just about 11% of Black students in Minnesota, right? And Mississippi has better academic performance than our states among students of color, right? In Minnesota, we're so quick to say, we're the best, look at us, oh, look at us, right? And this isn't a knock on Mississippi, okay? Big Reggie, this ain't a knock on Mississippi. This is a knock on Minnesota, right? I'm born and raised here, but it's a knock on Minnesota. We have to do better, okay? Every place in the state, in the country, is nearly outperforming our state, right? We have worst in nation achievement gaps. Mississippi, Texas, Florida, right? Florida, I brought them up earlier. They spend less than what we do per pupil, right? And they have the third highest student outcomes in the country. Money, 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 right? Dollars don't mean results. And that's clear, right? Dollars do not mean results. But the teachers union president, Denise Specht, Education Minnesota, she's going to keep saying, show me the money. Show me the money. We need more money, right? And I'm saying that we all need to be saying back to her and the rest of the status quo, show us the results, right? Show us the results, y'all. This is the dark side of education, y'all. I'm glad y'all's tuning in. Shout out to the Bright Beam Squad, E-Class, Josh, whole Bright Beam Squad. Citizen Stewart, I'm looking forward to joining you on your show this week. I think Tuesday I'll be on there, ready to chop it up. It's been a while since Rock the Schools, right? I miss you, Citizen. I'll be there. I'll be there. Now, before I get into, what I and a lot of other folks think are possible solutions, right? solutions to some of the things that I've talked about above, right? I want to share a few things that we have coming up here in Minnesota, right? I mentioned earlier, and if you've been paying the social media, we've been talking about how the school systems here in Minnesota have almost completely turned their backs on families, right? Working class families, poor families, families of color, they've completely turned their backs on families, meaning they've turned their backs on our children, right? Later on this afternoon, and you can find this stuff on Facebook, Minnesota Parent Union Facebook page, but later this afternoon from 4:30 to 5:30, the Fannie Education Alliance, shout out Fannie Lou Hamer, the Fannie Education Alliance, which Minnesota Parent Union is a part of, going to be hosting a parent-to-parent listening session, right? Parents will be discussing their concerns, asking questions about reopening, right? What's going on with this fall? Another big event we got coming up on the 20th, 6 p.m. to 7:30. This will be on Zoom. You can also get that flyer and that information off of our Facebook page. But it's the Minnesota Back to School information session, right? I mentioned this last week that in collaboration with some of our partner organizations like Ed Allies, Way to Grow, Uplift, others, right? We're going to host this event, and Ed Allies is going to basically do their best to unpack Governor Walz's executive orders and the guidance from the Minnesota Department of Education. Now, I'm going to pray for Ed Allies because, you know, they've been hearing the same thing from the governor, same thing from MDE, and it's been underwhelming. But I'm praying that they can unpack that stuff, make it a little bit more clear for families, but also families will be able to ask questions, share concerns, right? And we're hoping that with those events, and there's another one on the 26th between Minnesota Parent Union and the Department of Education, but we're hoping that with that event on the 20th, our elected officials, Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, Minnesota Department of Education, we're hoping that you show up, right? We're hoping you show up for families, listen, learn, answer questions, and just show us, give us a little bit to let us know you haven't completely turned your backs on us, right? So again, find those on our Facebook page, Minnesota Parent Union, right? Join us if you can. Be sure to spread the word, okay? Now, funding. Back to funding. Lots of it, but it hasn't done anything to close the achievement gap, right? I already mentioned it's widening. Schools, MDE, our elected officials, they've thrown their arms up in the air and turned their backs on us. And if you're not affluent or upper middle class, where you have the resources to make it through this educational chaos, the end could be near, right? The response from our education leaders has been underwhelming. It's left a lot of us stranded and abandoned the rest of us. Now, how might we turn this system around right now, right? We know that the results that we're getting, what we're seeing in education, it's what they call adequate and uniform, right? We know in Minnesota, or if you don't know, now you know, we don't have a right to a quality education. So what we're getting, what we've been getting, is what they call adequate and uniform, right? And it's not enough. And we build these campaigns, we put together the policies for the Capitol, and you have to do that stuff, right? But I want to take a second and just sort of think back to my BLM days, right? Black Lives Matter. That's a fact. I'm not talking about the organization anymore. But thinking back to those days, right? One of the things that we would do or try to do is target the money, right? If you can impact the dollars, maybe things will change, right? Now I'm all about nonviolence and self-defense, right? But we've seen what happened after the murder of George Floyd, right? People took things to the next level. Now, we still got played by the city, right? They're still trying to play us. They're not going to give up justice. We have to demand it. We have to go get it. But when you target that money, you can make things happen, right? People move a lot quicker when there's millions of dollars on the line, right? And if you think about our education system, we went over the dollars, most of them. It's a lot more nuance to those dollars, of course. But you think about all of that money, well, there's millions of dollars there, right? And if we target the money, which I say it's that time right now to target the money, we might be able to make some things happen, right? We might be able to finally lead the way as families of color, finally lead the way to closing our achievement gap, right? So how do we target the money? Parent strike. That's something that we've talked about, right? We see teachers right now in this moment, although they're teaching in pods, making some good bread, they're threatening strikes if our schools say they're going to go back in person, right? Teachers unions don't get their way. What do? They go on strike. They threaten to strike. And at the same time, they're telling us that it's all about our children, right? Now I'm going to mess this word up, right? But I was having a conversation. The teachers union fiduciary responsibility, and let me know if I got that word right, but the teachers union's fiduciary responsibility is teachers. If that's your responsibility, there's no way you can ever do, right? By law, you can never do what's best for children if you think it goes against what's best for your teachers, right? So when they strike and they say, hey, this is for the children, we see the results. This is for the children. Here, let me show you something. They say, hey, this is for the children, right? This is what our children are getting, right? This is the education that our children are receiving. And this doesn't, to be clear, right? Because I know some of y'all are parent haters, you blame the kids, whatever. This isn't about kids. This is about an adequate and uniform system that gives the world to affluent white kids, and this is what the rest of us get, right? And I want to remind you something. When you're looking at Asian students and you're like, well, damn, they're doing pretty good, right? You could desag this data a little bit more, and you'll see that Hmong students, it's not looking the same, right? So imagine we're seeing how terrible this data is. We're looking at it right now. And underneath this, it's even more criminal, right? So they go on strike and say, oh, this is about the kids. Well, this is what our kids are getting. And my question then becomes, how long are we as parents going to continue to not push back in the same way that these teachers unions try to bully us? I only know one way to handle a bully, right? You can't just keep letting them take your lunch money. You just can't. They're going to do it until you stop them. So parent strike, what does that look like, right? Unenroll your students from schools, right? And I have the tendency to say bad schools, but right now it's getting kind of hard to tell which schools are good, which schools are bad, right? But by bad schools, I mean the schools that aren't listening, the schools that aren't returning your calls, the schools that have let you know, well, hey, your kid's going to be doing worksheets all year, and we're going to cross our fingers, right? We're not going to give your kid the quality of education they need. So we're just going to cross our fingers, send some worksheets home with you, and then we're going to try and act like we don't want the affluent and upper middle class to do pods, right? We have to unenroll from those schools that are ignoring us. They're turning their backs on our children, right? And if you need help unenrolling, contact one of our family advocates, right? That this isn't a journey that you have to walk alone, right? That there are folks who want to support, who provide that free support to help families unenroll from bad schools, and maybe you find a good school, right? And I know folks are going to say, oh, well, he just wants everybody to go to charter schools, but hold on now. A good school is a good school. Charter, private district. Unenroll from your bad schools, enroll into a good school, right? Good schools that have shown that they have partnerships with families, that they see parents as partners, and they have the academics to go along with that, right? We have to hit these schools. We have to hit the system right where it hurts. And that's in the pocketbook. I heard a stat earlier this week, and I don't know, I'm assuming it's close, but 12%, right? If you look at the worst schools in your neighborhood, the worst schools across all 87 counties in Minnesota, right? My guess is that the worst schools academically, and there's a few outliers, but the worst schools academically also have the worst communication with parents, also see parents and students as less than if they don't have that white skin color, right? We have to hit schools where it hurts. We have to unenroll our kids, right? And of course, we do this with the demand, right? We make demands. Those demands could start with, we demand a quality education. We demand to have a right, an individual right to a quality education here in Minnesota. And there's policy that we have for that, the Page Amendment. So they might look at you and, well, what does that mean? Well, the Page Amendment, we have that. It's right there. A couple of the smartest guys that I've ever met, Justice Page, Federal Reserve Bank President Neil Kashkari, they're sharp. They've dotted the I's, crossed the T's, right? And they didn't stop there. They said, hey, here's what we're thinking. Let's get out into communities of color. Let's get out into all of these communities across Minnesota and see what other folks think, right? They believe that our students deserve a quality education, but they also understand we don't have a right to that right now. So we're getting what we're letting them give us, right? We're accepting it, whether it's because we don't know, whether it's because they hide it, and that's why we don't know. Whatever it is, our current educational system is in chaos, and the only way that we're going to be able to move some things in the right direction is to go on strike. Unenroll our children. Schools don't want to listen. Take our babies out, right? Schools don't own our children. They get that $13,000, $14,000 a per pupil spending per year. And what are they doing with it? Right? As I was preparing for the show, hell, it was difficult to follow the money. Right? When I started to look at things, it's like, where is the accountability for all of this money? It's not in our results. So where is it at? Right? We have to hit the system where it hurts in the pocketbook. Unenroll. You're hearing from other families that they're going through the same thing. Get organized, band together, unenroll our students from these schools. And if homeschool isn't an option for your family, I understand, right? Because ain't no way I'm having all my daughter and all my nieces and nephews homeschooling over here, right? So I understand it might not be an option, but there are other good options out there. And one of the things that we're going to do and continue to do is make sure our families here in Minnesota understand the power that we have as parents, right? Period. That's how we have to do it. The system isn't listening, right? We can write op-eds. I seen an op-ed this week, former Superintendent Peter Hutchinson. He said there's a crisis. Well, I agree, Peter. And I think Peter would agree with me when I say, well, the system has known that. You can find 15 articles from the past 10, 15 years that talks about how embarrassing our education system is, right? So what do we do, y'all? Right? This is about self-determination. I argue with people on Facebook once or twice a week who I feel are trying to blame families for the state of our education system. So I want to make it clear, yes, this is about self-determination. It's time to rise up. I said it before, Captain's not coming to save us. We have to free the minds of our children by any means necessary, right? And some folks are going to say, oh, he's trying to ruin public schools. That's not true. I'm trying to make sure that my daughter, your children, our children receive a high quality education, right? It ain't just about my kid. It's not just about your kid. It's about our children. Like I said, my sister, Pastor Maria, there's no such thing as other people's children. I hear her say it once a week, once every other week. And that's the mindset that we have. Our kids might be okay, but what about our children across the communities? All right, we might be able to get a tutor. We might be able to join a pod. Some of us, we might be able to move the tutor in, give them a spare bedroom. But what about everybody else? That's who we have to think about, y'all. It's going to take something real drastic to make this system change. We can't wait on the system. It's not in our best interest. It's time for us to do what's in our best interest. If you want to know more about the parent strike or how to unenroll, hit us up. Facebook, Twitter, hit us up. We're organizing parent-led chapters all across the state, right? Because the issues that I've talked about today, the results, the per pupil funding, the funding in general, these aren't just Minneapolis and St. Paul things, y'all. They're not. It's another part of their narrative that they try to use to create that division, right? The achievement gap in Minnesota is a problem. It's there, it's present in all 87 counties, right? And before I get up out of here, just a few reminders. It's like every other show, right? Quality is a must. Failure is not an option. Zip codes should not determine quality of education. When parents choose, kids have a chance. Families of color and low-income white families are going to change the game. If you think about all of the efforts that have taken place in Minnesota, we've seen many of them, and they've left our voices out. They've ignored our concerns, right? Did to us or for us rather than with us. The time is now, y'all. There's a war on parents, on families of color, waged by the teachers' unions who think we're just stupid old parents, y'all. This war has been going on for quite some time now. Teachers' unions have been killing our children's hopes and dreams for many years. But finally, the dark side of education is coming to light. Are you ready to gear up, y'all? Minnesota Parent Union is. Several other organizations are. Text MNPU to 33339 or go to our website to join the movement. All right. Tune in next week, y'all. I thank you for tuning in on Justice for the Cities. I'm Rashad Turner. This is the dark side of education. God's peace and blessings to everyone.